Hello, and welcome to our second MicroBrute tips video. Let's get started. The MicroBrute has a sequencer. Pretty straightforward. But what's not obvious is that you can create sequences that span more than just 2 octaves. Just hit the octave up and down buttons as you record your sequence, and you can create some pretty impressive sequences across multiple octaves. Alright, let's get that going. Just like any sequence, you can transpose these sequences. And as you may have noticed, I like to set the sequencer to hold so that I don't have to keep a key pressed while the arpeggio or sequence is going, and you can set that through the Arturia software. Okay, on to the next tip. The MicroBrute doesn't have an arpeggiator, only a sequencer, but you can sort of get around it. What I do is record a few patterns. This was a major chord, and this is a 7th chord. And let's record a minor. And I put my sequencer control in end mode. This makes sure that each pattern I select gets played till the end, no matter what key I press. Now I can start my sequencer and switch between the chords. As long as I switch the chord before it's time for the chord to start, I can go from major to minor to 7th as I please. Let's take a look at the oscillators. The level knob in the mixer behaves differently beyond the 50% point. You'll notice when I change the volume, it sort of goes up and down slowly. But when I start to move beyond the 50% point, the signal gets driven very aggressively. Check out what happens to the triangle wave. If I make it louder beyond the 50% point, it starts to change, gets more rounded, and the tone changes. And whereas if I were to just increase the volume, it would continue and stay a steady fixed triangle. I want to talk a bit about the sound design impact of the oscillator variations. Check out the metalizer. Besides being beautiful on the oscilloscope, look at the harmonics on the spectrum analyzer, how much it adds to it, and you can later filter that. Same goes for the pulse width modulation. As we add harmonics, these are things that we can later filter with resonance to create very interesting sounds. Finally, for the overtone, overtone lets you add one of 2 different square waves, one an octave below the note you're playing, and another a 5th above. If you look at the spectrum analyzer, you'll see how the sub to 5th knob shifts the volume between those 2 tones. And of course we can add the core tone, in this case the triangle wave, to those 2 notes. And if you look at the oscilloscope, I don't know about you, but that's the prettiest thing I've seen all day. Okay, let's talk about the mod matrix. By default, the envelope is connected to the metalizer, and the LFO controls the pitch. You don't need to connect any patch cables for that to happen. So for example, here I'm modulating the pitch of the tone, and no patch cables are connected because that's the default connection. Same goes for envelope. I'll turn on the metalizer, and as soon as I increase the envelope amount, you'll see that there's an attack, there's a change in the metalizer. It's getting modulated by the envelope. Once I connect a cable from the envelope out, let's say to the pulse width, you can see the metallizer no longer gets modulated, but rather the pulse width changes based on my envelope settings. Another important mod matrix tip, let's increase the modulation here with the LFO. The minute you plug in a cable, you can see the LFO stops, because that breaks the connection between the LFO and the pitch. And now that the LFO is connected to the filter, I can modulate the filter cutoff point. Now here's a nice one. If you want to connect a modulation source to more than one destination, you can do that with a simple headphone splitter cable, just like this one. So I will plug that into the LFO out, and then plug 2 patch cables into the either of the outputs of the headphone connector, and I will use the LFO to modulate both the filter and the pulse width. Now you can see the filter affecting the entire sound, and you'll notice the changes in the pulse width as well. I can of course connect the second cable to any other destination I want. For example, if I wanted to modulate the overtone, that creates a very nice effect. By the way, the manual I think says you can do this to up to 4 different destinations. So potentially if you have a stackable cable or a bunch of splitters, you could get pretty wild with this. For the next tip, there are quite a few patch sites out there, and I'll put links in the description to all of the ones that I found, and if you know of any others, let me know and I'll add that to the description later on. But a lot of great sites with patches, and you can learn a lot by actually dialing in each of those patches and trying them out. And as you probably figured out, you can't save patches on the MicroBrute. So one of the things that I like to do is whip out my phone every time I think I've discovered something genius and take videos, not snapshots, but take videos of the sounds that I make. And that way I can hear a patch before I actually take the time and dial it back in and play with it some more. On to the next tip. If you ever wondered what business cards were good for these days, they are for sticking in between keys so you can hold a note while you play with modulations. It's only half the fun if you use one hand for the filter. So next time someone gives you a business card, thank them and put that to good use. Next tip, synchronizing your BPM with an exact tempo. You can set your tempo precisely using external devices like a Volca, or in this case I have an iPad with an app called Link to MIDI, which very easily lets me set the tempo to a specific rate. On to the next tip. The MicroBrute is an amazing synth, but it is just a mono synth. And sometimes you want to connect maybe another oscillator or even play polyphonically, and you can do that using the external line in. The first step is to get the tuning right between the MicroBrute and whatever synth you're connecting to it. There's a knob in the back that lets you fine-tune the MicroBrute. That's it. In this case, I'm just using GarageBand and a soft synth, of course. Once you get that right, you can play multiple notes either with the MicroBrute or without. And the point for this is that you can still use the envelope generator, for example, to have a slow attack, as well as apply a filter to the incoming audio. Not to mention brute factor. Last but not least, let's talk about filter envelopes. First thing, the most important thing you need to know is that the envelope is always connected to the filter no matter what. No matter what's in the mod matrix, the envelopes are controlling the filter as long as the envelope amount knob is not in the middle point, right? Either it's high like it is here, or you can set it low. If it's not in the middle, you're going to be controlling the movement of the cutoff point of the filter using the attack, decay, sustain, and release sliders, regardless, by the way, of the envelope amount knob as well. You can see here the envelope amount in the envelope section is set to 0, but the envelope amount in the filter section is set to the max, is set to positive, which means the cutoff point will move up and then down if there is decay. If it was set to negative, it would move in the opposite direction. And filter envelopes are, among other, how you create these beautiful rises. So that is it. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, hit like and subscribe, and hope to catch you in the next video. Thanks.